Every year when Christmas is celebrated, a Bible verse is often brought up. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. As recorded in Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6, the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Also at Christmas time, so many people sing or listen to Handel's well-known Messiah, which contains this familiar verse from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. It's a pity not many people actually pay attention to the prophet Isaiah, who spoke this extraordinary prophecy more than 700 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. In fact, both Isaiah's life and family were unusual. The book of Isaiah, written by the prophet Isaiah, is sometimes called the Little Bible. It's because the Bible has 66 books, and Isaiah has exactly 66 chapters. It's written in chapter 1, verse 1 of the book. The vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Well, from this verse, we know Isaiah was a prophet for nearly 60 years during the reign of these four kings of Judah. This verse also says Isaiah's father was Amoz, and according to Jewish tradition, Amoz was likely the brother of Amaziah, king of Judah. If this was the case, then the prophet Isaiah was of noble birth and received royal tutelage in his education. He worked as a scribe in the palace, keeping records of state affairs. And as noted in Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 3, Isaiah's wife was called the prophetess, and she must have been a great help to Isaiah in his ministry. The prophetic couple had two sons. Isaiah 7 and verse 3 states that his older son was named Shear-Jashub, which means a remnant will return. Chapter 8 verse 3 notes that his younger son's name is Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz, which means quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. Both names represented the prophecies God had intended Isaiah to deliver. At that time, God's people had not been taken into captivity, let alone the return of a remnant. However, later historical developments confirmed these to be true. The word Isaiah means the Lord is salvation, or the Lord's salvation. True to his name, Isaiah spoke many prophecies about God's salvation for the people of Israel and for all mankind. He foretold not only the first coming of Christ into the world, but also Christ's return. In particular, he described the desirable new heaven and new earth. He said, "The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox." Isaiah 65:25. However, this is all written from the perspective which man can understand. It's only when Christ actually returns that we shall see the true face of the new heaven and new earth, and we shall be astonished at the splendor and glory of it all. There were many enviable events in Isaiah's ministry. For example, it's recorded in Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 3. I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. In this vision, God allowed the prophet Isaiah to behold his glorious throne. But there is one thing God asked Isaiah the prophet to do that we might not want to do. In addition to prophesying about Isaiah's own country, God also prophesied about the surrounding nations through him. The way in which the prophecy was made against Egypt was special. It's recorded in Isaiah chapter 20. At that time, the Lord spoke through Isaiah, son of Amoz. He said to him, Take off the sackcloth from your body and the sandals from your feet, and he did so, going around stripped and barefoot for 3 years. God asked Isaiah to do this because the people of Judah were trusting in Egypt instead of trusting God wholeheartedly. God wanted his people to know that Egypt would be humiliated by the stronger Assyria and proven unreliable in the future, just as Isaiah said. We can imagine during those 3 years, Isaiah's wife and sons would be with him and all become the laughingstock of the people. How many families can bear such humiliation? The prophet Isaiah came from a noble family and could have enjoyed a lifetime of prosperity and wealth, but he responded to God's call, saying, Here I am, Send me. He was willing to do what God wanted him to do and to obey unto death. Reportedly, Isaiah obeyed God's command to deliver a message of rebuke and warning to Judah. But King Manasseh did not like it, so he ordered him to be bound into a dead tree trunk and then sawed to death. The prophet Isaiah was thus included in the fathers of faith by the author of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 37. He was the man of faith who was sawed in two. Indeed, Isaiah obeyed because he believed in God's promise to those who would obey. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, as written in Isaiah chapter 58, verses 8 and 9. And the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, Here am I. What a precious promise. When God calls us, may we, like the prophet Isaiah, respond to God by saying, Here I am. And God will likewise say to us, Here I am. God assures us that he will give us his presence in this world and eternal blessings for the age to come.